Dune review, stunningly cinematic, thrillingly weird sci-fi epic cuts out too early. In US theaters and streaming on HBO Max Thursday, Denis Villeneuve's epic star-studded adaptation is a sumptuous sci-fi experience. The best-selling books in the Dune series are as intriguing and ambiguous as a desert's shifting sands. So it makes sense a star-studded new movie adaptation from director Denis Villeneuve manages to be both hugely satisfying and incredibly frustrating. The 2021 Dune film is a tour de force of cinematic sci-fi, a star-studded yet deeply weird fantasy epic, and a thoughtful and thrilling movie experience. Then it stops right in the middle. Villeneuve's version of Frank Herbert's 1965 novel opens with a title reading Dune, Part 1. That's your first warning that the film isn't going to give you a lot of closure. It's certainly packed with ideas and stunning visuals and information by the spaceship load, but it's also the setup for a story that's just getting going when out of nowhere the credits roll. Having premiered to critical acclaim at the Venice and New York film festivals and made over $100 million in box offices across Europe and Asia this weekend, Dune hits theaters in the US on Thursday, October 21st. It's also debuting the same day on US streaming service HBO Max. Dune also opens in UK cinemas this weekend and in Australia on December 2nd. The powerful Atreides and Harkonnen families are space aristos squabbling over the planet Arrakis. A desert world where the only thing more treacherous than the shifting sands is the backstabbing politics. Arrakis is the only source of spice, a substance that acts as the fuel for space travel in the Dune universe. On Arrakis, spice glitters in the very air, riches so intoxicating you can taste them. Spice has a mysterious allure for Timothée Chalamet's young princeling Paul Atreides. He's got a lot going on. His dad is an upright duke teaching him to play the game of cosmic realpolitik. His mom is a superpowered space witch. Plagued by horny teen dreams of a blue-eyed desert warrior. And he just might be an intergalactic messiah. Paul is at the heart of this thumping space epic, which combines Shakespearean castle intrigue with widescreen desert vistas, incendiary battle scenes and a cast of billions. In Villeneuve's hands, this version of Dune is a richly detailed and hugely evocative imagining filled with striking imagery. It's supremely and winningly odd. The film juxtaposes fever dream science fantasy with medieval imagery, sinister space nuns in billowing robes descend from looming spaceships. Interplanetary treaties are endorsed with wax seals beneath fluttering banners. Berserker armies make blood sacrifices before donning silent jetpacks. It's all faceless helmets and deep shadows as the action moves from rain-slicked granite to iridescent sand, set to a hypnotic and throbbing Hans Zimmer score of wailing choirs, electric drones, nerve-jangling percussion and great honking BWAARRRRPS. And bagpipes. The rain-lashed homeworld of the upright House Atreides is perfect for moody pacing on wave-battered cliffs. The vaguely Catholic decor of that world includes a bullfighting motif, which suggests two separate but intertwined themes. A foolhardy fight against an unpredictable opponent, and a link to Spain that recalls Spanish conquistadors of old. That link to ancient invaders highlights the timelessness of the urge to conquer and enslave, drawing a line from the past to the present. Dune's theme of ransacking desert resources has always resonated with Western manipulation and exploitation of the rest of the world. From bygone days of colonialism to the Gulf War and the War on Terror. The conflict is explicitly grounded by Villeneuve and cinematographer Greg Fraser in the visual style of a modern war movie. Dragonfly-like aircraft thrum past the camera like Vietnam-era helicopter gunships as the air fills with distinctly 20th-century radio chatter. All that's missing is Ride of the Valkyries on the soundtrack as Dune channels combat flicks from Apocalypse Now to Lawrence of Arabia to Black Hawk Down. The film opens with an army suddenly withdrawing from Arrakis, and it's a chilling image in light of the chaotic US withdrawal from Afghanistan in recent weeks. Arrakis has seen men like you come and go, says one indigenous character. Who will our next oppressor be? Asks the world-weary narrator. The conflict is explicitly driven by wealth. And it's fascinating to see a sci-fi movie grapple with the economic aspect of politics as well as the familiar interplanetary power struggles of Star Wars and Star Trek. House Atreides may be noble and the Harkonnens venal, but their nature is irrelevant in this galactic economy. No matter how they feel about it, they must fill their quotas. Space capitalism. It's hardly a polemic, however. There are so many ideas flying about in this film that many are mentioned only once, and you're invited to develop your own thoughts on inequality, scarcity of resources, climate crisis, war, feudalism, space travel, dreams, parenthood, oneness with nature, and so much more. As if that wasn't enough to mull over, it's all wrapped up in a dense lore of multiple languages and strange terminology, which means multiple voiceovers explaining it all. The weirdness of the sci-fi is also grounded by a limited range of color on screen. Beyond the blackness of space, the only colors in this universe are gray and beige. Don't get me wrong, Dune looks great, but outside of the fantastical design, the muted palette borders on drab. The acting is also similarly muted, everybody is impassive and solemn and mutters the often incomprehensible dialogue in hushed tones. Like Villeneuve's previous films, it's dramatic and intense. But it's also rather one-note, allowing Jason Momoa to stand out, for example, just by showing that he's enjoying himself. The most dynamic range comes from Ferguson as the conflicted Atreides matriarch, embodying the emotional turmoil of a character who's both impassioned mother and scheming zealot. As for the actor in the leading role, Chalamet's cheekbones and soulful eyes do most of the storytelling. Like Ryan Gosling in Blade Runner 2049, he doesn't have a great deal to say, which makes his character either beguilingly ambiguous or vaguely defined. Is he dutiful or distracted? Is he a reluctant leader or ambitious plotter? The young prince is troubled by visions of the future, and they're troubling for the viewer too. Some of those visions flash forward to a sequel, and frankly look more exciting than some of Part 1's drawn-out sequences. With such an abrupt ending begging for a sequel, you might wonder if they've shot the two films together. No, the sequel may go into production in late 2022, and only if this first film is a success. Which is far from guaranteed in the face of a pandemic and a streaming release potentially cannibalizing its box office takings. If you loved Arrival and Blade Runner 2049, then Dune is perhaps Denis Villeneuve at his Villeneuviest. If you love sweeping military sci-fi with a dash of weirdness thrown in, Dune will be your jam. The muted palette and performances won't be to everyone's taste, but I could spend a lot more time in this world, when the sequel finally arrives, anyway. Even if it doesn't deliver much of an ending, this new Dune is a hell of a beginning. Dune movie, first 10 minutes left me with a dropped jaw, high expectations. Let me prepare you for opening night. When the theatrical and HBO Max release of Denis Villeneuve's new sci-fi epic Dune were still 3 months away, a handful of IMAX theaters across the US hosted a special 2-day Dune event. The presentation revealed the first 10 minutes of the film, as well as 15 minutes of related materials and the movie's trailer. I attended the event. Here's what you need to know to prepare yourself for the film, which arrives in theaters and on HBO Max Thursday, October 21st. Spoilers ahead. From this point on it will be difficult to talk about the experience without spoiling the film, so if you don't want any details ruined, please stop now. Everything revealed at the Dune IMAX event. The 30-minute presentation was designed to be a sneak peek at the film, and it contained the following. The first 10 uninterrupted minutes of the film. Remarks from the cast on their experiences in the film and how they hope the audience will appreciate it. A scene from later in the film. A brief remote conversation between director Denis Villeneuve and Hans Zimmer on the score and background audio choices. Snippets from the film to support the conversation. The first theatrical trailer for Dune. 1. The movie jumps right in. The Dune universe is a lot. The scale of everything is ridiculous, its rules more than a little weird. And you could probably spend the time it would take to see this film in its entirety breaking down the galactic politics leading up to the opening scene. But instead of holding your hand through all of author Frank Herbert's backstory, this film just drops you in the middle of everything. You get a brief explanation from Chani, played by Zendaya, about why the planet Arrakis is important, how ruthless the Harkonnen family are and that suddenly they left. There's a question about who the new oppressors of Arrakis natives the Fremen will be, then immediately you're taken to the bedroom of royal scion Paul Atreides, played by Timothée Chalamet. And his story starts. As a fan of the Dune universe, I loved this. No hand-holding, no background, just 60 seconds of introduction and off we go. I wouldn't go so far as to say it felt like the introduction you get in the book, but the feeling of being dropped into something that feels impossibly big is familiar. 2. The characters' special abilities are amazing. I'm grouping all of the different special abilities you see in the Dune universe as powers for the purpose of making this point. Across all the scenes included in this preview we get to see Paul using his voice on his mother Lady Jessica and Master of Assassins Thufir would wield his mentat ability. And there's a one-on-one fight with personal shields on. Spectacularly, none of these things looked or felt the way I'd imagined they might. In each case, what I saw on screen was even more impressive. The unique audio choices that represent the voice. The way Thufir's eyes instantly go wide as he processes information and the skin-close shimmer of a personal shield all made me so excited to see more of each. 3. Hans Zimmer invented new instruments for this film. This was a fascinating detail from the conversation between Villeneuve and Hans Zimmer. The legendary composer said it was weird epic space films are always scored with music that sounds decidedly earthly. So he sought to find new sounds to help demonstrate how alien these planets truly are. He didn't specify just how he invented these new sounds, but in the example scenes, he certainly nails a strangeness in the score. Zimmer also relies on singing, especially when someone from the Bene Gesserit nuns is on screen. The higher-pitched chanting or soft-spoken women singing in the background immediately bring a feeling of power and terror to their scenes, which is appropriate given everything they're capable of. 4. All of the vehicles I saw were perfect. I've seen many iterations of the Dune vehicles across TV, film and video games, and I've never felt like any of them fit the descriptions in the books. I'm not sure the vehicles in this new Dune movie match what's in my mind's eye either, but they're undeniably the coolest versions I've seen so far. Ornithopters in Villeneuve's Dune are more dragonfly than bird in design, but they do a great job moving more like the animal than a ship, which was the point in the books. These small cruise ships were always supposed to fly more naturally than mechanically. The carryalls are often described as like an ornithopter but bigger, but that isn't what you'll see in this film. They don't look bad at all, but they don't look like bigger versions of the main vehicle. Spice harvesters feel truly massive in this film. The sheer size of them, even as one is fully consumed by a giant sandworm, is incredible. Finally, the Spacing Guild Eagliner no longer looks like a spaceship, and that's great. The scale of these vessels were often lost in previous films and shows, but this version helps show how insanely big they are. 5. Those blue eyes. There's been a lot of conversation about whether the Fremen eyes were enough. In the past, their eyes have always been presented on screen as glowing, piercing, electric blue. While that looks great, I never felt like it did justice to the way the eyes are described in the books. In fact, the eyes of a bat are described as being blue within blue, with no white at all. I think this is more realistically presented in this film. It feels more plausible that the blue would be intense but not unnatural. And trust me, on the big screen, the blue is blue enough to bring the intensity when needed. Dune ending explained, and how the movie sets up a spicy sequel. What's going on in the finale? Who survives? Why is Zendaya hardly in it? These questions and more answered right here. The main thing you need to know about the ending of the new Dune movie is this: there isn't one. The 2021 adaptation of the classic Frank Herbert sci-fi novels is actually Dune Part 1, so it gets halfway through Herbert's book and then it just stops. Okay, so it's a bit more complicated than that. Kinet reviewer Richard Nightwell said Dune is a tour de force of cinematic sci-fi, a star-studded yet deeply weird fantasy epic. So here's a closer look at what happens in the climax of Denis Villeneuve's star-studded adaptation of Dune, and how it sets up a planned sequel. Spoilers heading your way like an angry sandworm exploding from the sand. Spoiler alert! The film's been out in Europe and Asia for weeks since its premiere at the Venice Film Festival, and now Dune Part 1 is in US theaters, as well as streaming on HBO Max in this epic magisterial sci-fi saga. Duke Leto Atreides and his aristocratic family touch down on the sand-choked world of Arrakis only for previous occupants the Harkonnens to violently reclaim their all-important spice mining operation. It's very nearly the end of the Atreides clan, but also a big step toward a larger destiny for Leto's sharp-cheekboned scion, Paul. Soulfully played by Timothée Chalamet, Paul has been seeing visions of himself in the desert of Arrakis, meeting a mysterious stranger who looks a lot like Spider-Man and Euphoria star Zendaya. So as the film ends, Paul escapes into the desert with his witchily weird mother, Lady Jessica, and the film ends on a cliffhanger ready for Dune Part 2. Frank Herbert's original 1965 novel splits fairly neatly into two sections, and though movie studio Warner Brothers hasn't confirmed a sequel yet, Villeneuve wants to pick up with the second half of the book later. Villeneuve's version isn't completely identical to the book. For example, he's cut the villainous Harkonnen character Fade, memorably played by Sting in David Lynch's 1984 film version. Lynch's odd and much derided film told the whole story of the book, but with less depth than this new 2021 version. At the end of the 2021 film, Leto is left behind, and if you've ever wanted to see Oscar Isaac naked and stiff as a board then you're in luck. Leto is paralyzed thanks to the treachery of Paul's teacher Dr. Yu, played by Chang Chen. Yu's reward is to be murdered by the Vino Baron Harkonnen, which means he doesn't live to see Leto take advantage of the poison gas capsule the traitor slipped into his teeth. Leto's dying breath finishes Harkonnen's advisor Peter Reese, played by the Suicide Squad's David Dastmalchian, but the fiendish Baron uses his shield and zooms to the ceiling. Bathing in viscous black oil, the Baron, played by Stellan Skarsgård, lives to plot his next move. Meanwhile, among the Atreides casualties is Paul's friend and mentor, burly action man Duncan Idaho. Played by Aquaman star Jason Momoa. Duncan goes down fighting a squad of ferocious Sardaukar troops supplied by a duplicitous emperor, though it isn't entirely clear why Jessica couldn't use the voice against their attackers. Or they couldn't just have closed the heavy doors and fled. Either way, Duncan clearly isn't showing up for the sequel, though Paul's other teacher Gurney Halleck isn't killed on screen. If you've read the book you'll know that leaves the way clear for Josh Brolin to return in the proposed sequel. As for Paul and Jessica, their narrow escape delivers them into the sandy hands of the Fremen, the desert people of Arrakis. Their leader, Stilgar, played by Javier Bardem, offers safety to the beleaguered pair, much to the dismay of his follower Jamis, played by Roots and Star Trek Strange New Worlds star Babsaluz and Mokun. Jamis doesn't believe the newcomers can survive the harsh conditions of the desert and burns with resentment against the outsiders, picking a fight to the death known in the book as the Tahati Challenge. It's here that Paul sees his visions begin to come true. First he meets the girl of his dreams, Chani. Just as in his dreams, she gives him a Christ knife, the ceremonial Fremen blade made from the tooth of a sandworm. Paul stands in as Jessica's champion and ultimately kills Jamis with the knife given him by Chani. This is the first time Paul has killed anyone, though with the Harkonnens still around it's unlikely to be the last. The fight wins Paul and Jessica acceptance into Stilgar's hideaway, known as a CH. That's where they're headed as the credits roll and Paul gazes into Chani's glowing blue eyes. Zendaya was only on set for 4 days, and if you're left wondering why she's barely in it, well, did I mention there's supposed to be a sequel? Considering this is a story about galactic emperors and starships and space witches scheming across time and space, the film seemed to be building to something more stirring than a knife fight in a cave. Ending the story with an intimate emotional moment is a clever subversion of the usual blockbuster space battle, so Villeneuve deserves credit for that. But when the film is so drastically open-ended, it would have been more satisfying to see at least some kind of resolution. But if you've read the book, you'll know there are still plenty of big revelations to come. Is Paul really Muad'Dib, the Kwisatz Haderach, the cosmic messiah of Dune? What's the meaning of Paul's visions of himself with blue, glowing eyes? Will he return to his rain-swept home planet Caladan? Will he defeat Baron Harkonnen, and will he face the scheming galactic emperor who set this death and destruction in motion? Only time, and Dune Part 1 single-quote box office receipts, will tell. If Dune is a hit in theaters and on HBO Max, then Warner Brothers will hopefully give Villeneuve the go-ahead to shoot the sequel in the next year or so, and hopefully we'll get a proper ending. Dune movie's out now, a guide to all the terminology you need to know. Excited for this new sci-fi movie, but not sure what they're saying? We're here to help. You could write 10 books on the planets, intergalactic politics and people who live among so many stars in the massive Dune universe. And some people have. Frank Herbert's 6-novel epic is surrounded by other stories written by his son Brian Herbert with the help of the inimitable Kevin J. Anderson. We know the movie in theaters and streaming on HBO Max only covers part of the original book. But that doesn't make the amount of information needed to get the most out of what we are about to experience any less intense. Fortunately, you all have me. I've been reading the Dune books my entire life, and all of that information finally has a use. Here's a quick terminology guide with basic explainers to help make the movie that much more enjoyable. Hardcore Dune fans may shout, just read the book. But, fun fact, the first Dune movie released in 1984 also had a paper handout explaining all of the strange language used in the film. It seems a little silly to hand out a piece of paper for people to refer to in a dark theater when you want them to watch the screen in front of them, so I'm going to do it a little differently. Please don't use your phone when the movie starts. But if you want to glance at this before it starts and after it's over, you have it here to enjoy. The Emperor. After several galactic wars, one of them against robots, the great houses of the universe decided there needed to be a ruling body of sorts to dictate how things would be. The Dune universe is now controlled by a single ruling family, House Corrino. The head of this house, Emperor Shaddam IV, is the 81st Emperor of the known universe. As the movie starts, the 68-year-old Emperor worries about his place as Emperor, thanks to a rumor he'd poisoned his 138-year-old father. To maintain power, Shaddam needs to keep everyone in the universe happy and under control. Spice. Everything in the universe requires this mind-altering drug to continue at its current pace. It makes you smarter and live longer. Under extreme conditions it even makes your eyes turn blue, but more on that later. Everyone uses spice, aka melange, though how much you use impacts its effect. Space pilots take it so they can navigate this universe's form of hyperspace, and tacticians take huge quantities so they can process massive amounts of information in a short period of time. Everyone needs spice, and without it the universe would grind to a halt and a lot of wealthy people would die, because this stuff is artificially extending their lives. Arrakis. Spice can only be found on one planet, and that's Arrakis. This planet is almost entirely desert, with very little naturally occurring water found on the surface. The spice is the byproduct of massive sandworms that roam the entire surface of the planet. Attempts to move sandworms to other planets to create multiple places with spice production have failed. It only happens on Arrakis. This is the most important planet in the universe, and whichever family the Emperor puts in charge of mining spice is thereby one of the most important. House Harkonnen. At the beginning of Dune, the family responsible for mining spice on Arrakis is the Harkonnen family. The homeworld for this family is massively industrial and polluted. Meaning they had done such a good job stripping their own planet of its natural resources, the Emperor thought they would be perfect for mining Arrakis. House Harkonnen is asked to leave Arrakis at the beginning of the Dune story, because they were stealing spice to sell on the side instead of giving it all to the Emperor. These are not good people, and they will do anything to regain control of Arrakis. House Atreides. As one of the most popular of the great houses in the universe, Duke Leto Atreides and the rest of his family have built a reputation for doing the right thing and helping those in need. They are incredibly popular, and it is believed that if they run the mining operations on Arrakis it would keep everyone in spice for a very long time. But being that popular usually means your enemies are willing to do quite a bit to take you down. Fremen. The native people of Arrakis are a tribal people dedicated to living in harmony with the planet, which frequently makes outsiders see them as supernatural or even magical for being able to survive in the desert and coexist with the massive sandworms. Fremen are usually easy to spot, as they all have spent so much time with spice in the air, water and food. They have developed deep blue eyes. The whole eye is blue, not just the retina, and they call this the eyes of a bad. You'll also see Fremen wielding a Christ knife, a sacred weapon forged from the tooth of a giant sandworm. When the Harkonnen occupied Arrakis, the abuse of the planet was so extreme some Fremen felt it necessary to take action. This caused a great deal of bloodshed and in some cases enslavement of the Fremen, all of which ended when House Atreides took control. But that doesn't mean all or even most Fremen trust the new occupants of their planet. Stillsuit. Arrakis is an extremely hot desert with almost no moisture in the air, and being outside in normal clothes for extended periods of time is almost always catastrophic. Everyone who lives on Arrakis, including the Fremen, wears stillsuits to survive in a harsh environment. This suit not only keeps your whole body safe from sandstorms and extreme heat, but it also collects all of the liquid your body produces and filters it to the point of being drinkable again. Yes, all of the liquid your body produces. All of it. Bene Gesserit. There's an intergalactic guild of supernaturally enhanced women in this universe, called the Bene Gesserit. Among many other things, these women can alter the chemical composition of their own bodies to create poisons and manipulate others through a power of suggestion called the voice. This collection of abilities is frequently referred to as the Weirding Way, and even includes a particularly lethal form of combat. The Bene Gesserit are frequently revered as holy women, cursed as spies or witches, and generally feared and respected everywhere. It's extremely rare for a man to be taught the ways of the Bene Gesserit, much less be particularly good at using their abilities, because they're extremely careful with their breeding and picking who gets trained. Mentat. After a great war with thinking machines, the great houses decided to permanently ban the use of complex computers. Instead, great human computers called mentats were created by the great houses. These humans are capable of immense calculations in milliseconds, as well as military strategy, though not all mentats are created equal. The training usually starts at birth, and these human computers are exposed to something called the juice of Sifo once they have shown advanced cognitive abilities, to further expand their mind. One of the greatest living mentats is the Furhoat, who serves House Atreides. Personal shields. As protection from assassins, many wealthy members of the Galactic Court use a personal shield to keep themselves safe. This energy barrier is custom calibrated to the needs of the wearer, meaning it can be loose enough to allow someone to reach a hand through it or dense enough to restrict air molecules from passing through. These shields are close enough to the skin to protect the wearer from just about anything at range, though a slowly moving blade can penetrate a shield if wielded correctly. It is also known throughout the worlds that if a personal shield were ever hit by a lasgun, the resulting explosion would be atomic in scale. Dune becomes Warner Brothers' biggest opening of the pandemic. Even with the HBO Max simultaneous release, Denis Villeneuve's Dune was a winner. The box office numbers are in for Denis Villeneuve's Dune. Released in US theaters on October 21st, the sci-fi epic scored a milestone opening box office of $40.1 million. This makes Dune Warner Bros.' biggest three-day box office since it launched its simultaneous release strategy with HBO Max. Its sales passed previous record holder Godzilla vs. Kong's $31 million opening at the end of March. Warner Bros. Saw slightly less respectable numbers with day-and-date releases in the months between. James Gunn's The Suicide Squad was a notable disappointment in August with a $26.1 million opening weekend. Space Jam, A New Legacy and In the Heights also failed to make a splash. Dune fared well at the international box office as well, collecting another $47 million. Its current total gross globally is $220 million. "I'm smiling," Warner Bros. President of Domestic Distribution Jeff Goldstein said on Sunday morning. "Exhibitors are thrilled. The best part is, fans are loving what they're seeing. They're loving the big screen experience. It's been a winner of a weekend for movie lovers." Director Villeneuve had always intended Dune to have two parts. But Part 2 hasn't been greenlit, and Villeneuve expressed concern that the day-and-date HBO Max release plan would hinder box office revenues and diminish justification for the sequel. Dune cost Warner Bros. $165 million and would potentially cost the studio another $150 million for the sequel. Warner Media chair Ann Sarnoff told Variety that, "The story in itself sets up for a sequel. The production is so amazing and the storytelling is so compelling that it's not going to be judged on box office alone." Dune has been received well by critics, described by Connect reviewer Richard Trenholm as a tour de force of cinematic sci-fi. A star-studded yet deeply weird fantasy epic and a thoughtful and thrilling movie experience.